And if I can just remind members online, if you remain muted unless you're speaking, otherwise the cameras keep flicking back and forth. Thank you.
Okay. Morning, members, for the meeting in the FAPM. The first item on the list is apologies for absence. Have we got any apologies?
Isaac and Proctor and Islo Thomas.
Right, thank you very much. Anyone else, or is that everybody? Oh, must be everybody then. We go on to item 2, declaration of interest. Anybody got any declarations? Mine's only new in, which is still an ongoing project, and one day I'll be able to come off the list. Anybody else got anything with declaration? No. The chairperson's announcements, I've got none that I'm aware of. So we'll move on to item 4 then. To receive the minutes of the Finance Audit Performance Management Committee on the 24th of July 2023, and it's on page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, and page 9. Members happy with them? Are we all in agreement? Yeah. All right. We now go on to item 5, which is a medium-term financial strategy and revenue budget update report on page 11. And who's leading on that?
Thank you, Chair. I'll
Chris?
do that.
Chris?
I'll do that report.
Thank you.
This report is a series of finance papers you've got on the agenda, Chair. And the intention is that we'll look at this MTFS report first, and then Lisa will follow up with the current state of play on the revenue and capital budget monitoring reports, which play a significant part really in the context of what I'm going to say on this report as well. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to go through the report in detail page by page. It follows the usual format which members have seen before in terms of the medium-term financial plan. So what I'm going to do is just really go through the high-level sort of messages in the report and the background really against which we're considering it today. Probably the place to start on that is the current financial year. This may well not be news to most members, I would hope, in terms of the current state of play within the economy. We're playing catch up like most organisations in the current financial year. The extent to which inflationary pressures, both on pay and non-pay, has exceeded provisions within our budget for the current year means that we're looking at potential overspends and pressures in the current year. And I'm sure you'll have all heard the First Minister say exactly the same about Welsh Government over the last couple of weeks in terms of their similar position. And local authorities, your own local authorities, will be in this same position as well. So in terms of pay, we obviously, when setting the budget for the current year, we had to estimate what pay awards were going to be, and pay awards have been exceeded in terms of the current financial year. So that's putting pressure on the budget for the current year and the medium-term financial plan. And in terms of the general levels of inflation in the economy, those in turn are impacting some of our contractual positions, particularly on energy, ICT, our telecoms budgets, and our contracted services, which are tied to RPI increases. So they play a significant part in increasing the cost of the fire authority. In terms of all of those things, of course, they roll into the following financial year and then on to the rest of the medium-term financial plan because they affect the base budget of the authority. So what we've done in setting the base budget for 24/5 and beyond is we've included the knowns that we now have. So current pay awards in the current year insofar as we know them. We're still estimating, of course, the Green Book settlement for support staff within the service, as within all services, is still unknown for the current year. So that's still a kind of guesstimate in terms of where we are. But we've had to build those into the base budget. So the 24/5 budget that we're looking at and beyond builds those figures into the base. The headline figures within the report that are in there show that there's a significant £7 million per annum pressure on 24/5's budget. Now, about 1.7 million of that is inflationary pressures brought forward from the current year before you start considering the impact of next year. And then about 3.3 million of that 7 million is additional inflationary pressures coming forward from 24/25. And then, as with all years, what we ask our staff to do is to submit bids to deal with upcoming demands on the service. And there's a further £1.3 million coming from estimates of what they need to actually continue to run the service in the same vein as they currently run it, and that across a whole range of different aspects. So all of those pressures come to a total of about £7 million for next financial year, and that gives an increase of about 7.8% on the base budget. And you can imagine that that's going to be quite a significant challenge for our funding partners to accept. The indication from Welsh Government was that councils would get a possible uplift in their settlement of 3% next year. So already we're something around twice that increase. That said, you know, that the 7.8% is the current assessment of what we would need to increase our budget by in order to meet our costs going forward next year. So that's the context. Beyond next year, we're assuming that inflation levels return to a more normal level in the economy, but of course that is out of our control. We know what action the Bank of England is taking to get inflation under control. We know what the government targets are for inflation, around 2 to 2.5%. Whether they will achieve that and how quickly they will achieve that, we don't know. We can only make valid assumptions based on those estimates currently. So beyond the sort of the 24/5 timeline, we see our assumptions fall back to more reasonable and normal levels, should I say, of inflationary pressure. There are a couple of issues when we consider how the medium-term financial strategy pans out, and particularly in respect of next year. And I'll just outline those for members, so members are aware of some of the risks that exist within the budget. The first one is obviously the response to the culture review. The culture review is ongoing. Whilst we've got a reserve set aside for the actual cost of the review itself, what we don't yet know is what will come out of that review. There could be a need to invest in services, you know, in terms of the way we respond, the way we operate, some EDI issues arising from possible recommendations within the report. There could be training needs. So all of those things at the moment, we will await to see the outcome of the review and to see whether and to how much there is a need to invest in the service. So that's one sort of risk area, if you like, that's in there. We obviously need to maintain our investment in reducing demand for our services. So the community safety work and the other initiatives like that we operate, we do that for a specific reason, and that's to keep our costs of responding down. We rely on significant grants from Welsh Government to actually undertake that work. What we don't yet know is whether or not those grants are going to continue. We only get a one-year commitment from Welsh Government to those grants. At the moment, the medium-term financial plan assumes that we will maintain those grant levels, that they will be agreed again for next year. But given the announcements made by the First Minister and the pressures on Welsh Government, there is a risk that some of those grants may be stopped or pulled, and the service would therefore have to decide how it responds to that. In the past, the service has made the decision that it needs to continue to invest in those sorts of initiatives, whether it's grant aided or not. But clearly there is a budgetary issue there for us. If we continue to invest and we don't get grant to support those services, then it puts a further pressure on our budgets in an upward direction. So those are some of the risks that exist within these numbers. It's probably obvious, but I'll say it anyway. All of the figures we've got beyond this current financial year are estimates, as I said in the outset of this report. We really don't know what pay awards are going to be for next year. We've based our estimates on around 3% in terms of pay awards across the authority. I've had conversations with other public sector bodies on this issue. Some are of a similar size. Some are being more bullish. Some are being far more risk averse and are going with higher figures than that. But until we start to see what inflation is doing, until we start to see what the lie of the land is in terms of pay awards going forward, it's difficult to know whether 3% is reasonable or not at this moment in time. In terms of the actions flowing from this report, members are obviously asked to note the strategy and the current projections within it. But of course, we're not stopping at that point. SMT will be considering the context of this report, and indeed have already started considering the context of this report. And I think there's a few important messages for members in terms of what we're doing here. The first will be an ask to defer all non-critical spend in the current year to protect the reserves position. If we overspend in the current year, clearly we'll be looking at utilising reserves to fund that. And we don't want to use those reserves in that way. We want to maintain those reserves to try and invest in the service and try and drive improvements and also future cost savings. So we will be looking to defer any non-critical spend to try and recover the position in the current year, but also to identify any potential reductions or savings in the MTFS going forward as well, to try and get that 7.8% figure down as low as possible. We will be reviewing the reserves that exist within the service to look where they can assist with our 24/5 budget and beyond. We've used some reserves to deploy to fund some of our existing in-year services this year. One of the things that the scrutiny committee asked us to do as a service was to provide more information on reserves in terms of the MTFS. And you'll see on the report, which is going to the Fire Authority next week, there is a little bit more information on our reserves within that report, which looks at the extent to which they're committed and the extent to which they're available to actually assist in this issue. So we have provided some of the background to that within next week's report to the Fire Authority. And the other aspect we will be doing, of course, as always, is reviewing staffing budgets to identify whether there are options or assumptions we can make to try and improve the financial position with regards to cover for our staffing budgets. We did that in the current year as well, and we will continue to do that for next year and beyond. And that's a range of things. It's about assuming whether or not we will in fact have all staff in post, making assumptions about whether or not we could use reserves to fund temporary positions within the service, rather than include them in base budget. Obviously a reasonable assumption to make if we can do that. So there are those types of activities that are going on as a result of the preparation of the MTFS. So I wouldn't want members to think that this is a kind of fait accompli. It is the current projection in terms of our medium-term financial plan, and there is now work to go on in the background to see what we can do to assist in bringing this figure down and actually arriving at our reasoned position that you have to make a decision on towards the back end of this year and into next year. I'm going to stop there, Chair.
Yeah, have a drink now, Chris. You've done well then. Any questions from any members? Anybody got any questions? Yeah, Ian? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Only one, Chris. With the Welsh Government stopping the 600 grand a year thing for the Firelink and Airwave project, I thought that was, I thought Welsh Government had committed to that money, so it was almost guaranteed. Am I misunderstanding that, or have they just gone back on it?
When they announce the grants, they only agree one year grants, so they don't commit to future funding of any of these initiatives. This is an issue which has been a bone of contention with financial directors across Wales. Really, what we need from Welsh Government is a certainty of funding over the medium term, and we don't get that at the moment. I could say for obvious reasons, clearly they're limited in terms of the information they get from Westminster about their future budgets as well. But certainly in respect of the grant funding, they only give us 1 year commitments, and that £600,000 airwave communications network funding has now stopped in the current year. So we are not receiving that in the current year. What we did when we set the budget for the current year, we effectively added that to our budget bottom line. So that is now being funded by the local authorities as part of the contributions budget, which is not helpful to our funding partners. They receive no additional funding to deal with that. That's how it's currently dealt with. So effectively, Councillor, there's no funding now for communications network within the base budget.
Thank you very much, mate. Cheers.
You okay with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't understand why it stopped. So thank you very much, Chris. Cheers.
Anybody else got any questions before I got a couple? No. Chris, I only wanted to ask to clarify it. How much percentage do we keep in reserves compared to our budget? That's the first bit.
Okay, so at the moment, our general reserve is set at around 3.5%, and this is some of the additional information which will be in the Fire Authority report.
Yeah.
We do maintain reserves outside of our general reserves for a particular range of purposes. So, for instance, we have one to fund our PFI contract. We have a number of reserves now set up to fund things like the culture review. We have some funding in there to look at funding EDI initiatives on our stations, carbon reduction initiatives in terms of meeting the carbon reduction strategy of the authority, and items like that. So there's a detailed analysis provided within the Fire Authority report, which sets out our reserves position and a description of what those reserves are for and whether they are fully committed.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I just wanted to make sure that some of the newer members are aware of what we keep in reserve.
Yeah, there's always a lot of discussion around PSBs within Wales about what a reasonable level of reserves and balances position is, and you'll often hear 5% as a figure which is banded about unofficially as to a reasoned position. That's not cast in stone and not written down anywhere. It's an assessment by financial directors of what they think is reasonable given the nature of the budget and the risks within it. The reason why we settled on the figure that we've got in our reserves, it goes back a number of years now when we set our reserve strategy, and it related to the potential costs of industrial action if we had a significant period of industrial action, plus the risk of general overspending within our service as well as a result of things like pay awards or inflation changes. So it was set by reference to those risks, and that's generally the approach that most authorities take.
Okay, thanks for that. The other question I got, I'm concerned with the grant funding because we do a lot of prevention work and that, and there's an impact on our main budget. So that is a bit of a concern because we never know whether we're going to get it or not. So I don't know what the answer is to that.
That's correct, Chair. And I say we generally receive those grant announcements sort of towards the end of the year when Welsh Government is setting their general budget. I suppose the concern was that the announcements, for instance, on things like the airwave reduction were made quite late in the budget process last year. And we had very little option to address those issues that late in the process. We would hope that we would get announcements like that earlier, but the indications are that Welsh Government's budget is actually going backwards in terms of a date rather than coming forwards, which is really unhelpful. We're talking about just before Christmas for the draft budget now. So that gives everybody very little time to react in these circumstances.
Yeah, thank you for that. Did I see
Yeah,
Maureen
Powell is indicating she's got a question.
Yeah, Maureen, you would come in.
Thank you very much. Is there a great difference? More costly to us to have more part-time firemen than full-time. Does that make a difference?
Can I answer that in general terms? Clearly, on-call firefighters, the cost of running an on-call firefighter is substantially less than a full-time firefighter, simply because by nature they're not employed full-time. We have looked in a number of areas over the years, and as part of the last fire cover review, I think it was assessed whether or not it would be cheaper to replace on-call fire stations with whole-time. I think the indication is that it's significantly more expensive to run a whole-time operation than an on-call operation, but it's a risk-led thing at the end of the day. You'd probably have to shut quite a few on-call stations in order to fund a whole-time presence, and that whole-time presence would not be able to cover the same area as an on-call facility across several stations. So in the past, it has been risk-driven, and that's the basis on which we do it.
Wouldn't want that anyway, would we? Wouldn't want to have any closed down if we could possibly help it. Thank you very much, Chris.
Come in, Chair.
Yeah, by all means.
Yeah, I'd totally agree with what Chris said, and I think sort of the blended approach we have within South Wales is right. Yeah, it does take us back to our fire cover review in 2011-12 or thereabouts. We did review it, the fire cover review, and the need for doing another review about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was deemed that the stations we have and the crewing models we have on the stations as appropriate. I still believe that's the case, and I do think the blended model, where we've got traditionally our whole time stations in our more urban areas, our busier areas, and our on-call stations in the more quieter areas, rural areas, I think they both support each other very well. So that I don't think there's a need to change, and more importantly, I think that there's a balance of risk if you start changing the model as well. So financially, I think we've got our whole time stations where we need them, and we've got our on-call stations where we need them. So I think the model is right. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that, Dewi. Any more questions before we move on to the recommendations? No? Somebody like to propose and second it, and we'll have the recommendations, and then Sarah will ask each person. Thank you very much. The recommendations that members note the risks and uncertainties, which we all know, within the projections, and improve the strategy as a basis for financial planning over the strategy period. And that's a lot to say. So, Sarah, did you want to ask members individually?
No, if it's been seconded, that's fine. And as long as all members are in agreement, if anybody isn't, if
Anybody
they can
disagrees or no? No. Or abstains even, if you get that one. No, that's great. Thanks everyone for that. We'll now move on to item 6, which is a revenue monitoring report, 2023 to 24. That's on page 41. And that is Lisa Mullen to lead on that, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I apologise in advance if my voice gives out. So this is the first budget monitoring report for the revenue budget for 23-24. Members would have seen in the summer the outturn reports for 22-23, and the outturn leads straight into monitoring for the current year because it's about lessons learned. So in this initial report, it presents the picture from the 1st of April 2023 to 31st of March 2024. The information that's there at the moment shows we have a £1.7 million overspend, and that information is presented over a number of appendices. Appendix 1 details the original budget, the transactions to date, the forecast position, and any variance analysis between the budget set and the forecast position. Definitely useful to reference throughout our discussion this morning. This information is inclusive of grant expenditure and grant income, so members have got a complete picture on where we are of things. There's a reserve statement that's attached to Appendix 2, and what that does is it tells you what the output of this budget monitoring, what effect that has on the year-end reserve position. And as we know, our reserves are the cornerstone of our financial planning. And appendices 3 and 4 are centred on our grant initiatives. So there's a table there giving the over and unders on grants provided, expenditure against those grants, and a narrative update on that. So if I just take you through the report, the overspend can be divided into 2 distinct areas: employee and non-employee related spends. Employee related spends are £485,000 overspent. 350,000 of that is related to a differential on pay awards. So at the time of budgeting, we budgeted for 3% on our grey book. And actually we know that that's turned out to be 5%. and that's resulted in this increase cost for this year. In addition to that, then we've got ill health pensions. When I looked at the information, there was 4 additional ill health pensions that had occurred since budget setting, and that resulted in an additional £121,000 more in that budget. It's a very difficult budget to anticipate because we don't know what's going to be agreed, or you know, it's one of those reactive areas, ill health. What I do know at the moment, though, that 121 is set to increase. I am aware of an additional retirement of that nature. So I think we need to keep an eye on that. And that's our employee overspend. So the overspend on non-employee related areas will fall into premises, training, supplies and services, transport, and contracted services, capital costs and income. The biggest of these is actually premises related spends, and the Treasurer touched on these. Our biggest challenge this year is managing our energy costs. There's around 810,000 related to energy costs that were unbudgeted for. Now, the essence of that at the moment is unit costs for both electricity and gas have increased, even if the usage hasn't. We're doing some work on that to try and firm up the forecast, because of course that's got implications for 24-25 budgeting. And those costs are not as yet worked into the base budget. There's an additional 138 there for indexation related to Airwave, and that's a 13.5% increase. Now that is going to be a retrospective from the 1st of April. I know there's a challenge from the Home Office on this increase, but it's unlikely that that's going to be held and that we are going to have to pay the cost of that. So between the 810 for energy and the 138 in Airwave, there's a small reduction in rates of 60,000, and that's bringing us back to the overspend of 900,000 on premises. We move on to supplies and services. We've got 100,000 overspend there, and that relates to a number of areas, and some of these are going to be funded from ring-fence reserves brought forward from last year. So stuff like there's 97,000 for flash hoods. Now there was an issue with the supplier last year. They weren't able to supply by the 31st of March. That money has been ring-fenced from 22-23 budget, put on the balance sheet to fund 23-24, so that's going to be funded in that way. There's also 92,000 there for local government election bill changes, and that's the streaming sort of facility that we have here today in the conference room, and that will be funded from reserves as well. In addition to that, we have 120,000 of home fire safety overspend. So this is an area that's grant funded by Welsh Government. These are the home fire safety checks. The expenditure that we get about 38% of the grant for Wales. It doesn't cover our spend, but we've chosen that we don't want to reduce the activity, as the Treasurer touched on in his MTFS report. We want to continue that work because prevention is better than cure, and we get a lot of mileage out of that afterwards. So we're going to continue with that, but it's a watching brief between the finance team and the community safety team. We are looking at ways where we can reduce non-essential spend to be able to cover that 120. So the 120 at the moment is the worst case scenario. And those 3 overspends, flash hoods, local government election bill changes, and the shortfall on grant-funded initiatives, they've been offset to a degree in a reduction in our insurance premiums. And that brings us back to the 100,000 overspend there. If we move on to contracted services, now contracted services are it's work that we put out to consultants, and basically that 142 overspend there is as a result of legal costs for cases that we have Audit Wales audit fees are in there, and that's relating to our financial audit, our performance audit, and of course there's a £36,000 there for cultural review fees that we wouldn't have normally have had, but that will be funded as well from reserves, and that brings us back to our £140,000 overspend. We've got additional capital costs. This is the link now between revenue and capital. Our capital investment forecast is greater than what we budgeted for before Christmas. As a result, our MRP charges have increased, MRP standing for minimum revenue provision. And what that basically is the repayment of borrowing that we undertake to allow our capital investment. So members will be aware that we do not get funding for capital investment activities. It's just for revenue from our funding partners. Our capital investment activities are funded from grants, a small £200,000 budget set aside in revenue, and some capital receipts. So if capital forecasts go up, MRP charges tend to track that. Additional income of 195,000 has come in. Bank interest rates have continued to increase. Members will be aware bank rate is currently 5.25. That's probably 0.75 more than we had budgeted for. And there's some additional income there of 63,000 that will offset expenditure up above. There's some, as I mentioned, out of that 1.667 overspend, some is going to be funded from our reserves. The part of planned earmarked reserve. Some are a watching brief. We will be trying to curtail non-essential spend throughout the year, and we will be reporting that position back to members as and when we meet. But that's the position that we find ourselves in at the moment. I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you for that, Lisa. Anybody got any questions, Lisa? Anybody in the room, conference room? No. I won't let you get away that easy. Are we looking for any efficiencies and savings throughout that, Lisa, please?
We are. What's difficult is we're probably not going to see a reduction in the budget because of efficiency savings, and the big reason for that is there's lots of our budget areas that are being subject to indexation. So Airwave is a really good example. 13.5% increase. You know, that's in excess of our own budget settlement. So if we did achieve efficiency somewhere, that would be used to pay for those increases there. So we do, as part of our budget monitoring, sit down regularly with all our departments and some central budgets and have a good look at them and try and plan them out. So hopefully some of those overspending areas we'll be able to mitigate throughout the year.
Yeah. It is a very difficult balance in that with everything at the moment, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
I think, Chair and members, the one thing that I didn't sort of touch on in my presentation, which is just as relevant here really, is as a service we haven't got much in the way of discretionary spend areas. Most of what we do is kind of governed by our need to respond and our need to do what we do. So there's not sort of large areas of our budget where we can simply switch stuff off. So it is about trying to concentrate on non-essential spend without hitting those areas which are actually contributing towards obviously public safety and those sorts of aspects.
Councillor Namami, you got a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, on the premises and the 800,000 overspent on energy. I mean, last year this time, it really was chaos. We had no idea what was happening really, except that our bills were going to treble and all that, and of course that reflects on businesses such as the fire and rescue services, schools, everything. Can I ask, is it clearer this year what is going to happen? I mean, you know, we've got an overspend now, and that's quite understandable, really, in view of the situation last year and what we knew about it. But say 12 months ahead from now, will we be in a better situation regarding the energy costs and the, you know, whether there will be this kind of overspend again that we will have to report and talk about?
That's a good question. I think it depends. Some of that depends on what the economy is planning to do, and we know that some of the impacts on the energy budget are a direct result of war in Ukraine and gas prices and things like that. What I can say about our own budget is that our unit costs are our current contracted unit costs. What I can check is for how long that unit price is set for, because that would give us some sort of feel for how long our costs are going to be the way they are, because our usage doesn't tend to go up and down. It's the unit costs that's caused this spike, and as I understand that has been a new unit cost in the last couple of months, which is why we are seeing these increased costs, these increases coming through now. So I think the answer is I can check the price, but other than that, I don't really know if that flux is going to end now. It depends what shocks are yet to come in the economy, if any at all.
Okay. But are we in a better position than, say, last year, or is it the same sort of uncertainties there?
No, there's
as
more.
we had?
Yeah, there's more certainty in terms of the unit price. I mean, we know what that is. The increases didn't hit us last year because we tend to contract for a lot of our services. So I think what we've seen is a delay in those increases coming through into our budgets. Because I think domestically, we've seen those increases Christmas time last year. So the same wasn't true for the fire and rescue service budgets then, because things tend to be contracted for a period of time, and then when that contract expires, then the costs come through.
Okay, thank you.
Okay with that, thank you for your question anyway. Any other questions, Lisa, before we look to go towards the recommendations? No? So somebody wants to propose and second it, then I'll make it easier for Sarah.
Yep, note that.
Thank you very much. Anybody abstaining? Anybody doesn't agree? No. That's okay. Thank you for that anyway. The recommendation is that the Finance Audit and Performance Management Committee note and agree the report content, which we've done. So thank you for that. We then move on to item 7, which is the Capital Monitoring Report 2023 to 24. That's on page 57, and I think that's Lisa again.
It is, Chair. Thank you very much. So again, this is the first monitoring report for the capital budget for the year 23-24. The report sets out and links to Appendix 1, which provides an overview of our capital position and how we fund that in the year. And it also includes Appendix 2, which provides an overview of the grants that we are lucky enough to get during the year. Taking Appendix 1 into consideration, you can see the layout there: property, vehicles, equipment, ICT and joint control. The budget for the year is 16 million. So there is a departure from budget to our current forecast, which is 14,804. That is a 1.9 million pound overspend, and we have got 3.6 million pounds worth of slippage. So what I aim to do now is just take you through the main headings that are contributing to that position. And we'll start with property. So a net overspend in the property area relates to both Monmouth Station, Monmouth and the solar panel projects. Monmouth, we're currently working with our partners to see if that is feasible. So that may or may not go ahead during this financial year. And the solar panel project also. Moving on to Newin Station, we all know that the purchase of land did not progress, and that we are currently in design phase for the new zero carbon fire station for the service. That's progressing, and we're hoping that construction will take place before the end of the financial year. There's a £2 million forecast for this year and 3 million being slipped forward into the new year. I see the majority of that being spent during 24-25, but of course we will come back to members and update you on the progress with Newin until then. This is quite a complicated project because a lot of the costs associated with this project are tied up in putting together a temporary provision for crews. The current site is quite small, and we're unable to house crews on our current Newin site, so we've had to lease a nearby site, and in doing so, we've got to feed in various services, water, energy and whatnot, to allow crews to be able to operate from that site as they would from their substantive position. So that is the complexity of the Newin Station project. Church is complete now. We just finalising that facility there with some solar panels, and we were lucky enough to secure some grant funding to be able to complete that. The solar panel work, we would really like to progress this year. It's been in the offing for the last sort of 18 months. Unfortunately, you need to have more than a south-facing roof for this to work. There's some structural issues with some of our roofs, which are fine as roofs, but to be able to bear the weight of additional weight of solar panels is not that straightforward. But we think that with Barry, we'll be able to press ahead with that work and get a battery down there, and that will be a test station for solar panels. Monmouth, we've discussed, that could be a potential co-location. You can see that we've got the whole project cost there in the forecast of 1.014 million. 676,000 overspend is recorded there, but that will be coming in from our partners. So we are leading on that co-location project. It looks like £1 million project at the moment, but that will be divided between us, the police and WAST. So they will each take a third share of that. Pontyclun, we're hoping that the firehouse in Pontyclun will be demolished shortly, and there's some bigger works occurring on that site. A major refurb will take place there in 24-25. At the moment, there's just consultancy searches and design costs in. Penarth, we are hoping to progress into construction phase in 25-26. That's a major refurb for the station. There's some to-ing and fro-ing with mast owners on that. We have a telecommunications mast on site. It's not easy just to take that down, so we are in talks to remove that mast with some reluctance from our telecommunications partners, but it looks like as if it can be achieved. The next project we've got there is the on-call station storage. It's not the on-call station storage project, it's just the on-call station project. It looks at storage, it looks at energy efficiency. There's a number of factors that we're looking at there for our on-call, 9 on-call stations, and we're looking at completing 2 stations a year. We've currently got Pontyclun coming to an end next month, and Treorchy started in July and will be completed this year. Now the on-call station storage and the on-call station project and the equality, diversity and inclusion project, they sort of go hand in hand together, and we may have to look at pacing between Gilfach Goch to be able to progress some of our more pressing needs in the equality diversity project. But at the moment, the forecasts show what our intentions are in respect to those 2 things. Planned and preventative maintenance largely encompasses our tower strategy. There were 5 to be replaced. We are nearly complete on that. Some good work being done there. If we move on to our vehicle replacement programme, the overall budget is 5 million. We forecasted 5.6 with no slippage. There's a few overspends there, and we've managed to secure some grant funding to be able to fund some of those. We have a number of areas there: the slide truck, water ladders and vans, rescue boat and water carrier. We're hoping that these things can be delivered by the end of the financial year. The markets have been particularly difficult for our vehicle deliveries, and a more complicated water carriers and appliances. There's a minimum of a 26-week wait and build time for them, so they easily slip into the new financial year, but we will keep members up to date with the timings of those deliveries. Moving on to operational equipment, there's a £240,000 overall budget that looks at RTC cutting equipment, modern terrorist arms equipment, and the use of biodiesel upgrade, the last 2 being grant funded. There's a slight overspend there on RTC cutting equipment, which is identified in Appendix 1. And that brings us on to ICT equipment. So the overall budget of 554,000 and forecast spend is a little more, 576 is in hand and will be completed by the end of this year. We have got quite a big piece of work ongoing with joint control and the replacement of the systems there. It's quite a complex piece of work. I understand majority of costs have been input for this year, but I can see that falling into 24-25, and again we'll update members on progress with that as we travel throughout the year. So I think we're spending less than the budget that was set. So budget set 16 million. Forecast 14 million. There's an overspend on various projects there of 1.9. There's a table there under 3.1 under implications, which shows how that overspend will be met, additional funding, and some will be covered from pacing and deferral of some projects into the new financial year. And that's it, unless there's any questions.
Any questions of any members regarding that?
Can I please, yeah, I might have missed it, but so when you look at Appendix 1, then the sort of the slippage is mainly in the new in thing. Did you explain what that was about? Sorry if I missed it.
No, I didn't. I think we've had lots of discussions on new in previously, but I'll revisit that. This is quite a big project. At the moment, this year, the costs that you can see, the 2.3 million, are preparatory costs. So that's including all our searches, consultants' fees, design fees, legal fees, things like that. So this year, we hope by the end of this financial year that we will start construction. But that 2.3 is all those costs plus the setting up of that temporary site. Normally, 2.3 wouldn't be searches and designs and legal costs. It's the temporary site that forms the crux of that 2.3 million. So next year in 24-25, you can see 3.5, 390 and slipped forward. Yeah. Okay. So that represents the bulk of the construction costs for the project. So this year, preparatory and temporary site fees. Next year, mostly construction.
Okay.
And normally these projects being quite big and quite complex, I could see costs running into 25-26.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Ian, would you like to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Leash. Just a question regarding the communications masts on the towers. You said at Penarth is a bit of contractual stuff. Will there be cost implications for the brigade over that? And is it, I'd imagine this isn't going to be a one-off because we got communication masts on quite a lot of our towers, haven't we? And if we're refurbing stations, is this something we got to look at? I don't know if it's doing like Welsh Government do with their money for us, doing a year-by-year contract, or I didn't know if that had come into it, Leash.
Yeah, it's a good question, Councillor. We've got masts on at least 6 of our stations. So when we rebuilt Cardiff Central, it'd be about 8 years ago, 10 years ago, Cardiff Central, something like that. We had to pay to relocate that mast. Now, if we could choose, we wouldn't have the telecommunication. If we could choose now, we wouldn't have the telecommunication masts on our sites because it limits what we can do with our sites. There are some agreements that are historical, that have been signed that are historical, and the people that have signed them have long gone. So we've had discussions at SMT about filtering down to station personnel if and when approached by telecommunications personnel. Any agreements, any signing requirements, they come into headquarters, because of course nobody on station has got the authority to sign those things. But it is a challenge for us, definitely. And I think with Penarth in particular, they wanted to renew the agreement with us, and that would have tied us in for a number of years. Was it 10?
Yes, 10 to 15.
It was a long time, and we knew that we needed to refurb that station in the next 2 to 3 years. So what we did to try and manage that challenge is we expedited the design fees for Penarth, and we are now in contention with the telecommunications company to sort of, we've given them about 6 months notice to vacate the site. So we've given them plenty of notice. I think that was done in the summer to find an alternative site. Of course, they don't want to because that is hassle for them. But for us, you know, it'll be very difficult to reconfigure that site without moving that mast.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you for that. Sarah, did you want to come in with that?
It's not actually me. Councillor Powell is indicating she wants to speak.
Yeah, by all means, yeah, Councillor Powell.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether this is possible at all or not, but is there any way that we can cut back on the consultancy costs and the legal costs? Because they seem to be, I think sort of things can get run away a bit, and I don't know enough about it to judge it, obviously, but is there anywhere in which we can not exactly curb them, but keep an eye on them so they don't run away?
I think that's a fair comment. I think there was 60,000, well actually it was 96 altogether increase on contracted services costs in the revenue budget.
That's right, there was 60.
20,000 of those, 36 relate to the cultural review, unavoidable costs of the cultural review team, given the work that they've been doing. It's been very difficult to define exactly how much time they would spend, how, you know, and the detail of the work that they need to do. So that's the first thing on those. 20,000 then of that 96 relate to masts. So we need to understand what our legal position is. We need an expert legal opinion. And as we know, it's quite a complex area. So that's why we sort of contract in those expertise. It's very difficult if we end up in court to be able
yes, we don't want to do that.
those opinions. Yeah. But you are quite right. We do need to monitor it, and we need to be clear about when we are contracted in those services.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question, Maureen. Sarah, did you want to take your hand down, or is there somebody else?
Chris Barton wants to come in now, Chair.
Oh,
Chair,
well, I'll let him come in. He got a big hand.
just a general point, Chair, on the report. And Lisa touched on this during her presentation. Going back to the revenue budget and the sort of pressure on the revenue budget, the capital financing requirements of the revenue budget are obviously entirely dependent on the capital programme, and they're dependent on it both in the size of the programme but also the timing of completion of schemes. And one of the things we may need to look at as part of the revenue budget is reviewing the capital programme to look at the timing of schemes to make maximum advantage of that. Now, clearly, what we don't want to do here is we don't want to be looking at cutting schemes out of the programme or deferring them to a longer time scale. But we can sort of slightly rejig the programme in some areas to just ensure that we time things right in terms of schemes. So that as part of the work that we're doing on the revenue budget, we might be undertaking a review of this. It won't change it wholesale, but it might just alter the timings of things if there's an advantage in doing so.
Thank you for that, Chris. The question I've got, are any of our buildings got this rack in it? And if so, what would be the financial penalties for us?
There's no financial penalties for us at the moment. During the summer, we were doing some work with the NFCC to determine how many of our premises have got reinforced aerated concrete, wasn't it? That's the whole terminology. We've got the property team undertaking, they undertook some survey work and I brought it back to SMT. I can't remember off the top of my head how many premises were affected or what the effect of that was, but it wasn't a concern for us at the time. But I can circulate that after the meeting if you wanted, Councillor Evans.
Yeah, it's just you know, somebody asked me what, you know, were buildings, and I immediately thought some of our buildings are quite old, so they would probably be in it. So yeah, it's great if you could do that.
We've done an initial review, and then last week, following all the reports in for the schools in particular, and that's schools in England, I've asked the property team to revisit it to see exactly where we are and what the implications are. So we may have it, and it may pose no risk. So it's trying to understand where we've got it and what the impact of that is. So I'll circulate that outside of the meeting. Is that okay?
Yeah, great. Thanks very much for that.
Chair,
You've got a hand up for one of the in the chamber, I call it.
just to Lisa was away last week. Just to clarify on that point. The survey work that was done across all the buildings of the estates in this service have eliminated the rack concrete in all but 4. It hasn't confirmed that there is rack concrete in 4 of our properties, but we can't eliminate its presence in 4 properties. And those properties are going through an additional monitoring programme with appropriate consultancy so that we can ensure that they are compliant and safe. So it hasn't been proven to be apparent, but we can't eliminate it in 4 properties.
Well, you don't know until you drill into it.
No, that's right, you don't.
Yeah.
Or something falls off.
Just to clarify that point. Thank you, Chair.
No, thanks for that, Sarah. It's good to know we are proactive on it, just as a matter of course. So yeah, thanks very much. Any more questions now for Lisa regarding that? Would like anybody propose and second it, and then right, thank you. Anybody abstaining? Anybody doesn't agree with the report? No. So the recommendation, the members note the budget and progress of capital schemes, approve alterations identified in Appendix 1 and associated movements in funding. So thank you, members, for that. We then move on to item 8, which is 2022 to 2023 annual Treasury Management Review, and that's on page 69. And I think that's Lisa again.
Yeah, I do apologise. You've got to listen to me for one more. So this is a statutory report to members. It needs to go to Fire Authority, so we bring it to FAPM to brief our finance colleagues beforehand. This report relates to the Treasury management activities for the year ending 31st March 2023. So as members are aware, we are obliged to approve a strategy for Treasury activities before each financial year. We tend to do that in February or March each financial year before the year started. Then before the 31st of December each year, I will provide an update, so a mid-year review. And then after the year is completed at the 31st of March, and before the 30th of September, I come back to you and I provide what we finalise the year with. And it's to make sure that the indicators that we set, the thresholds that we put in, that we haven't breached any of those, or if we have, we understand why we've done that and what the impact for our operating activities are moving forward. Effective Treasury management can be measured by its budget impact, and what that means is financing costs, or the cost of interest, and investment income and solvency and cash flow are managed effectively and to the advantage of the authority. So there's some information there in 2.2 about the size of, the magnitude of the cash that flows through our deposits throughout the year, in excess of 19 million. We've got the revenue budget, which is underwritten by our 10 unitary authorities, and managing that flow of money coming in and the payment of bills going out is critical, and it informs the timing of our borrowing activities, and our borrowing activities we know is integral to funding our capital investment. So there's two things here for us: there's solvency and there's capital investment activities that tend to colour a lot of our Treasury activities. So if I take you on to the appendix, because much of the detail is in there, there's some information there on the statutory position, the codes and the reporting requirements. If I take you down to page 74, introduction and background, it provides a summary table there. And what that does is it gives us the position at the end of the year. So we've got 21-22 as a comparator year. We've got the budgeted or the estimated position for 22-23 in blue there. And then in yellow, you've got the actual out-term position. Yeah. So what happened last year, what we thought was going to happen at the end of this year, and what actually happened at the end of this year. Okay. So it gives us at the opening CFR, or capital financing requirement. That's our underlying need to borrow. Against that, it compares our capital spending. Now you can see for 21-22, that was 2.4 million. That was much increased for 22-23. We spent £7.8 million in capital activities. Underneath that, it states how we funded those things. So you got CERA, which is capital expenditure to revenue account. It's 200,000. We set that aside in the revenue budget every year. There's some capital receipts there from the sale of vehicles, and some capital grants there of 1.4 million. What that means is, out of that 7.88 million that we spent, 6.2 million we actually funded from borrowing. And because we haven't made any new borrowing this year, that's internal borrowing. So we're managing that borrowing through the cash flows that are going through our accounts at the minute. Underneath there is the repayment of debt, or MRP, is the minimum revenue provision. So that is a charge on the revenue budget for the repayment of debt as a consequence of capital investment. So we can see the 3.2 million there as a general MRP, and 419,000 specifically for PFI. And that gives us a closing underlying CFR, underlying need to borrow, of 42.8 million. Now that CFR is quite important, because what that does is it sets a boundary level at which we assess our borrowing, whether our borrowing is prudent or not. Underneath there, you've got a borrowing position, which starts with gross borrowing at 28 million. We haven't undertaken any new borrowing during last year, and we finished the year as after making repayments of 1.4 million at 26 million. So we've got borrowing at 26 million and a CFR 42 million. what that means is we're in an under borrowed position of 12 million. It's good. We're not over borrowed. If you were over borrowed, our alarm systems would be warning. It would be an unsustainable position. You would only do that on a temporary basis. Over borrowing hasn't occurred. We're under borrowed. It's good. So that's one of the key prudential indicators for members to assess. We are not in an over borrowed position. The report goes on to talk about capital expenditure and CFR, making sure that we don't borrow to fund revenue activities. The fact that we're in an under borrowed position is testament to that. Okay.
That's good.
It talks about on page 76 the overall borrowing need for the service, the MRP policy that we've got. There was no changes to our treasury policies throughout the year. There was no need for that. And we were well within affordable borrowing limits. On page 77, I've revisited the limits that we've got and can confirm that none of them were exceeded. So we had authorised borrowing limit of 48 million. We know we finished the year with 26 million. It was not exceeded. The operational boundary of 46 million, again, we are fine. And a further indicator that we've got is financing costs as a proportion of our revenue budget, because we want to try and manage our financing costs. And we know that capital financing costs are a big portion of our revenue budget. So we put an estimate in of 6.85%. We were below that at 6.1%. Move on then to providing a treasury position, which is effectively a statement of our borrowing position at the end of last year. It gives you a little bit more information about the split of our borrowing. So some borrowing is paid on the maturity of the life. So if it's a 10-year loan, it's paid in year 10. If it's equal instalment of principal, it's usually a quarterly payment. It gives you the split there. And who we borrow with, and we are predominantly borrowing with PWLB, which stands for the Public Works Loan Board. It's cheap and it's safe borrowing for the authority. We've got some Salex borrowing there, and that is linked to 0% borrowing through Welsh Government initiatives. And that there was for energy efficiency investments we made about 6 years ago for LED lighting in our stations and boiler management systems. So that borrowing is coming to an end year, because you can see we opened the year with 6.8 and we repaid that during the year. Then on page 78, there's just some information on the maturity of our borrowing. So in less than 1 year, we need to repay 1.4 million. And then between 1 and 2 years, again, 1.4 million. And we've got to repay between 4.5 million in 2 to 5 years. So it gives members an indication of how much money we need to be setting aside to repay debt, because we can take the borrowing out, but we do have to then, unfortunately, repay it. There's some more information there about our average borrowing rate, which is 3.8%, which is very good. It's very low, and it is below current base rate of 5.25. So that's beneficial to us. As a result of that, we don't reschedule any debt. That isn't required because our current borrowing is quite cheap. So that's it for Appendix 1. There's some financial implications there of borrowing outturn. Again, 3.8% average debt rate borrowing. It gives some information on our interest that we repay every year. Now that interest cost runs through our revenue budget, 1.1 and 1 million for financial years 21-22 and 22-23 respectively. And of course, we've got some bigger investment returns, which is different to the same report I made this time last year. There were no investment made throughout the year. We kept our money in easy access call accounts, and that resulted in a £300,000 increase in interest income into the revenue budget. And we know we can use that to offset then some overspends that run throughout the budget. So I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Anybody got any questions for Lisa? No? That's a good one. They would like to propose and second it, and then that's the last one for that.
Good.
Thank you. The recommendations that the committee recommend to full fire authority the following. Note the annual Treasury Management Review data for 22-23 and approve the actual prudential and Treasury indicators set therein. So thank you for that. We now move on to reports for information, which number 9, internal audit progress report and audit action update, and that's on page 79. And we got Lisa leading on that one as well.
Yes. Name and print on there.
Normally, Steen would deliver on this. It's an internal audit report. Okay.
Helen's online. Helen
I was
can't.
going to say,
I
is
can
Helen here
deliver
for
it,
that?
that's fine.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm fine.
Yeah, that's great.
Helen.
Thank you,
Okay.
Helen.
Shall I start then? So we've got a couple of reports on the agenda for you today. If I run through them very briefly, the first one we have is sustainable procurement. So that was looking at your arrangements for procurement, making sure that you're thinking about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, looking to procure economically, looking at the social, economic and environmental agenda. The report has reasonable assurance. I don't know if you've got the report in front of you, it's on page 85. It's got a reasonable assurance opinion. We had no high or medium level recommendations, but we made a number of good practice points. So you're doing things to take it forward and you've identified that you need to do work in this area and you've got lots of things ongoing. But what we've done is we've raised a number of, we call them operational effectiveness matters, and they basically give you an indication of what we're seeing elsewhere, things that you could be doing to improve the arrangements that you have in place. So it's a positive report. It's recommending that you're taking steps forward in this area, but just giving you some guidance on what we're seeing elsewhere. So I don't know if there are any questions on that particular report before I move on to the next one.
Anybody got any questions for Helen? You're fine, you can move on to the next one, please, Helen.
Okay, thank you. So the next one is on page 101, which is the review of payroll. So this was looking at your payroll arrangements, how you pay people, how you put them on the payroll, how you make sure that their details are up to date and accurate and that you pay them on time. The report's got reasonable assurance, and the reason for that is one thing that we picked up in our testing, which we've raised as an important recommendation, and that's relating to the notification of changes in payroll. And so payments that are due, there's been some delays in notification getting to HR and then feeding through to the payroll, which has resulted in a number of overpayments. Now that's something that is down to communication between different stations or whatever with HR, and that's something that action just needs to be taken to make sure that that information gets through as promptly as possible, because the last thing you want really is to be overpaying people and having them to go through all the process of reclaiming that money. So that's the key issue that came out of that review. Are there any questions on that one?
Anybody got any questions at all? No, you're doing well, Helen, this morning.
Okay, I'll move on to the next one then. So the next one is on page, can't find the page number, 113, and that's the review of assets, looking specifically at mobile phones and how they were managed. This again has got a reasonable assurance opinion, so it's still a positive opinion. And we were looking at how you make sure that, that there's a strategy for replacement of the mobile phones, that there's a process for making sure that they're recorded, that those records are kept up to date. And the issues that we found are very much around policies and procedures and strategies needing to be either drafted or updated. So you have an ICT strategy that, when we looked at it, was just coming to its end, and that included a mobile phone replacement or an asset management replacement plan, which obviously was overdue review as well. So that needs to be updated. That was in progress, I think, at the time of the audit. Similarly, you don't have a specific asset management policy, but again, that was being drafted at the time of the audit. So things were happening, but weren't quite ready when we did the audit. There were a number of smartphone agreements which have to be signed, which hadn't been updated for the smartphone iPhone 13s at the time of the review. That's now being taken forward. And the other item that we found was that you had a list of all the mobile phones that were maintained by the manager, but they weren't being updated or hadn't all been updated onto the asset management system. So again, it's having the records that reconcile, making sure they say the same thing. So those were the key issues that we identified there. Positive report, but just a little bit of sort of getting things up to date. So are there any questions on that one?
Anybody got any questions at all, Helen? No, you're doing well. Thank you,
Okay,
Helen.
I'm having an easy ride today. And then the next report we have here is our follow-up report, which is on page 131. Sorry, I couldn't see it, it's blurred on my screen. This is basically following up all the recommendations from the previous year. We look to make sure that action has been taken, as you've said you will in the management comments that you provide to each of the reports. So we looked at a number of recommendations. I think there was 30 in total. Sorry about that, I usually have it written down. 30 in total, and we found that over half of them had been fully implemented. There were 11 that were in progress at the time of the review, so we were comfortable from looking at the work that was being done that steps were being taken to progress them. Some of them perhaps were slightly overdue, some of them were on track. And then there was one recommendation that had been looked at, investigated further, and a decision had been made not to follow that through. And that related to the red kite system and how that was going to be put onto your, I'm trying to think of the word there, the system. You were going to maintain records and pull them together, but the red kite and the operational firefighting equipment were on the same system, and it wasn't easy to pull the two to be apart. So that was decided that you wouldn't do that, which is perfectly reasonable, and we accept that. So this is basically the status of the recommendations. We'll follow those up again next year to make sure they have been completed, but we're happy that progress is being made.
Any other questions now by Helen? Well, thank you very much for giving your report anyway, Helen. And you've had an easy one this morning. The reports for information. So the recommendations, a member are asked to note internal audit recommendations and work completed to date on the internal audit annual plan. Is everyone happy with that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. We'll then move on to item 10, which is a performance monitoring report, 153. And I've got Assistant Fire Officer Dewi.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, members. Yeah, this is the first update on the statutory indicators we report the Welsh Government. So you'll find on page 154 the introduction. Some notable sort of things pulling out of the introduction. Yeah, we have had an increase in the total number of fires by 12%, you'll see. Something we've seen different, we've had experienced a high June, and the service attended 311 grass fires. And this was the biggest number since 2000 for June, since 2010. And as the report indicates, we normally see an increase in refuse fires as well, but on this occasion, quite unusual, that didn't occur, and we had a reduction in refuse fires. When I'm turning over, there's quite a bit of detail about where we are with our automatic fire alarms and our calls to automatic fire alarms. I think it does demonstrate how we're managing them in relation to stage 2, 3 and 4. And what it does say in the report, we will bring a further report specifically on how we respond to automatic fire alarms to this meeting in the future. So we'll be able to bring you more detail in the future with AFAs. Consistent with the report I give in June for the whole year of 23-24, we are seeing an increase in how we assist other services, and the number of special service calls we're attending, and that is something that we do manage, we are looking at, and we do triage through our duty group managers and our control staff to ensure that we only attend calls where it's right and proper for us to attend. But we are seeing an increase. It's something we're working with our partners, but we are trying to control it where we can. Again, a bit notable in the introductory report, the number of rescues we've conducted from as water rescues, and that's something with the support you've given us. Part of our duty with Welsh Government now is to respond to water incidents, and we are, with the right trained crews and equipment, we've conducted 14 rescues of people from water in the first quarter. And finally, when you're looking at the introduction, a pleasing note I hope you've pulled out is the increase we're now seeing in our home fire safety checks. In the first quarter, it was 3,857, and we're hoping to surpass last year's number of home safety checks. And again, the most pleasing thing is the vast majority are now face-to-face. So we're getting through the COVID way of sort of doing virtual inspections, and we are doing more face-to-face home safety checks, which I think, and I'm sure you'd agree, is the way that they should be done. When you look at page 157, it shows you the graph, and it just gives an indication where we're meeting our target, or better and equal to, or we're over 5%. And it does show 3 of the 7 indicators we're above target, or better than target, and unfortunately 5 of the indicators we haven't met the target. You go to page 158 and the next 7 pages over, it gives details of the respective indicators. When you see about total fires attended, yeah, we're 12% above, but I think notably it was the high number of grass fires we've dealt with as well. But there appears to be, other than deliberate refuse fires, an increase in the whole range of fires that we are attending. What I always do with members, I just can assure you this data isn't just sitting here and reported to yourselves, but this data is used by station commanders, watch officers, to have a look how they can influence these numbers and target their risk mitigation measures, community safety activity, to actually reduce fires and other incidences in their station areas. So yes, they can see these increases, but we're using this data to influence how we do work in reducing and educating our public in your respective unitary authorities and station areas. Moving over to 159, again, I'm not going to dwell on this. It talks about total false alarms attended, and again, in specifically to do with unwanted fire alarms. We will bring a further report here in due course, specifically on unwanted fire alarms, which was recently reported as an audit with Welsh Government. Total road traffic collisions, it does see an increase from our target, or from last year, of 34%. It will be interesting with this target to see a number of things. The impact now, COVID, and more people travelling in the South Wales area, and also the impact of the recent 30 to 20 rule. Will that see a difference and an impact on the number of injuries and accidents we attend? So as the year goes through now, it'll be interesting to see where we're having our RTCs, and have we seen a difference due to the changes that have been recently implemented. Total other special service calls attended. Again, I've part of the introduction, I've summarised that. We have seen an increase across the board, and we continue to work with our partners. But as I said, we do triage all the calls to ensure that the service only goes to the calls that are appropriate, and we're not taking unnecessary resources from assisting other agencies when we should be doing our statutory duty. We think we got the balance right. We are seeing an increase, and like I always say, and I have been saying, we're working with our partners to manage how we support them. And the next 2 indicators on 161, pleasing indicators. You can see that the first one relates to fatalities and injuries overall, and the next one accidental fatalities and injuries. And pleasingly, compared to the previous year, both these indicators perform better and below the target of that was set. So pleasing indicators. And again, this shows that where we do get a targeting work right, that we can have a positive result. And finally, when again, I'm linking it to community safety work. It shows the number of fires confined to the room of origin. One thing that is slightly disappointing, but actually just reinforces the message that we continually give, and we need to continue to give, is of the total fires confined to the room of origin, 37 fires not confined to the room of origin, 19 of them, so that's 51% of them, had no alarm present, which is disappointing, and it just does show the importance of us hammering home the message that every premises need working smoke alarms within their premises, and something that we continue to strive to get over to the public. So that completes the report in relation to the overview of the service, and then on the pages after that, you've got a specific report for each unitary authority, which as always will ensure circulated after this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dewi, for a comprehensive report. Anybody got any questions like to put to Dewi? Ian?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dewi. I got two questions. With our water rescues being at 400% and a bariatric rescues at nearly 50%, have you compared those stats with the other 999 services? Are they having the same amount of calls and they're just using us for more calls, or is it everyone's call profile has gone up?
If I just, you know, I haven't looked at it this specific, but what we generally see is where we've had the warmer weather, you know, and we did have a warm June, and we had a warm couple of months. People do go into our open water, you know, relaxation, but unfortunately, that's where we see the increase in the numbers. We tend to, and it is a statutory duty within Wales to attend water incidents. So that is something we would attend anyway. And perhaps we can understand the increase in those summer months. And then in relation to bariatric, we do compare with the other services. The other services do have a different response in some of their how they respond to bariatric incidents and support them. However, we believe that our support is appropriate. And as I said, we do challenge we do challenge WAST to ensure that, you know, that somebody's life is in danger. It is appropriate for us to attend. And what we've got to bear in mind is South Wales, the urban area of South Wales, Cardiff, Newport, the M4 corridor. We've got a high number, within our communities, and we do attend more calls than perhaps the other two services because of that.
Oh, thank you, Dale. Yeah, I think you've answered my question. Cheers, mate. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No. I think we're consistent with Mid and West. North Wales take a different stance. As a service, we believe it's right and proper if a member of our community is in need and WAST can't deal with it on their own, or the police. Then
sorry, I thought you finished. Please don't misunderstand me. I agree with that 100%. We'll help anyone who needs our help. All I wasn't sure of is if everyone else's calls have gone up that amount as well, and it's just that bariatrics are more prevalent in society, or is it just that our partners are using us more often? But you've answered that. Thank you, Dim.
Yeah, good question to ask, Ian.
Sorry, Chair.
Thank you for that, Dylan.
Sorry, Chair, but and I may not have understood your question correctly, Ian, but if I'm happy to go for statistics from WAST, and I can feed you the data separately or to members of this, if you wish. If I can get our stats from WAST for their bariatric calls, and if they go with that, are we mirroring that?
Yeah, and I don't need to know it there. I just didn't know if it would help you with your community safety planning and stuff. That's all, mate.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ian. Sarah, you somebody in the chamber got a question, I think?
Yes, Councillor Morgan's got a question.
Yeah.
Thank
Councillor
you.
Moore.
All the new builds that we've got in the boroughs, do we fire alarms automatically put in before they sold over to new people?
When you say new,
The new builds of houses we have well, we've got it all in blind of when.
Yeah, so-
Sites where the new houses
so all new
automatically put in. fire alarm.
so all new premises built now should have a hardwired smoke alarm anyway. Well, we would not normally, so the more houses you're seeing built now, as long as there is sort of loopholes that some of the companies have used, if they had put their planning permission in before the legislation was passed, they're not duty bound to put smoke alarms in, but really now all premises should be, new premises should have a hardwired alarms within on all floors within their premises.
Oh, good. Thank you.
For instance, thinking of property on the old school site in Everdale, they should have hardwired smoke alarm. Yeah.
Very much.
Thank you, Debbie, for that. And all planning now is the fire service is consulted in every planning application, so that's one good thing anyway. So is there any more questions with Dewi? No? Well, thank you, Dewi. That was quite informative. That's a report for information anyway, so we haven't got to make anything on that. The next one is item 11, which is the health check of priority actions and Q1 progress against the statutory performance indicators. And that's on page 173. And I think that's Sarah's. Have I got you?
Thank you, Chair. I'll cover this one now this morning. So, members, this is the first quarter report covering the period from the 1st of April to the 30th of June 2023. And it identifies for us how, as a service, we are contributing to the achievement of the objectives which are categorised underneath our 8 strategic themes. I'll move members initially onto page 177 of the report, which provides the strategic theme task overview. And on here, we can see that for each of our 8 indicators, how many actions are identified as red, amber or green or delayed in achievement of the objectives towards those strategic themes. The pleasing information is that the vast majority, 114, are green towards achievement, with 62 being amber. We have 6 actions across the whole of those 8 strategic themes which are red, and 22 have been delayed. And since Q4, 19 business plan tasks have actually been closed. 8 of those were completed, 8 have been embedded as business as usual, and 3 of those have been superseded by new tasks. So there is a very detailed information throughout the rest of the report about our achievement towards each of those strategic themes individually. It's not my plan to read you through that, members. I'm sure that you've all had a good view prior to the meeting. So this just provides members with assurance that we are starting to achieve our business plan objectives for this financial year, and I'm happy to field or hand off any questions as appropriate that members have got.
Before I state, on page 186, the Public Service Board is mentioned, so I'll have to declare an interest and probably, you know, because we sit on a scrutiny. I only just noticed this, it's my fault, sorry, so, yeah.
Yeah, thank you both. We'll have that declaration
Yeah.
added to the minutes at the beginning of the meeting.
Anybody got any questions regarding that report? It is quite in depth and there's quite a lot of work gone into that. Ian, did you want to come in?
Please, Chair, it's only one on point 2.2 on page 181. about having our on-duty or retained firefighter crews maximum available. I didn't know what stuff we got in place with this new 20-mile-an-hour limits affecting on-call firefighters responding to the station, and if you can envisage a problem with that.
Happy to answer that, Chair.
Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Ian. Yeah, it's something obviously the service has had to consider. But in relation to our firefighters turning in, we believe it isn't going to add any noticeable time to their turning in. It's something obviously we're going to monitor over the next months and years. But there will be firefighters that live next door to the fire station, and there'll be firefighters that live a bit further away.
Yeah.
So the impact is going to be different for every firefighter, and every on-call station is going to be different. So it's something the service will monitor. One thing that we do support is the fact that, you know, in line with the aspirations of Welsh Government, we hope that our firefighters will be going to less traumatic incidents in communities by the decrease from 30 to 20 within residential areas. So we're supportive of it. We realise it may impact our turn-in. However, we've yet to see, and we'll closely monitor what impact that has, but recognising that some will live, our firefighters will live very close to the station and can easily make the turn-in time. Others live further away, and we will have to see that impact. What we have done, I understand, and apologies, Chair, I've been away for a number of weeks. It's my first day back in work, but I understand we have given guidance and just clarified to all our on-call firefighters that they must abide by the recognised speed limit when turning in and drive safely and appropriately when they're turning in, and not compromise their or the public safety by unduly rushing to get to the call. When they are at the station, when they have changed, when they are on the fire appliance, they have then the ability to take legal exemption for going above the speed limit where it's safe to do so, using all their audible and visual warning devices. So we're emphasising drive into there, make sure they get to the station in a safe manner without breaking any speed limits, and we will monitor the situation over the next few months.
Thank you very much, Del. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. And thank you, Dewi, for updating us on that. The question I got on 177 for the strategic theme task overviews, what timescales do we put on any of these for actions?
Sorry, Chair, could you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, on a strategic theme task overview, with where we got red, amber, green, and delayed, what timescales have we got for any actions to move them to get it, you know, whether they're on red, amber, or delayed, to get them to the green?
The timescale will depend on how on the deadline or the milestone for each of those particular actions. So the way that we look at the business plan actions within the service is if one of our officers declare their action as red, they're basically saying if all things remain equal as they are now, I won't be achieving this by the deadline. That deadline could be this quarter, next quarter, or indeed the end of the financial year. So that's a way for our officers to apply extra focus and escalate actions that need completion. So I can't give you a definitive answer because some of those actions may be in the short term, but some of them might be in the longer term. But it's a way to flag that if all things remain equal as they are today, I won't be able to achieve this action by its particular deadline.
Excellent, thank you, Sarah. You just making sure we got control of them, that was all.
Oh, yes.
You got your hand up, Sarah. You're awful busy today. You got a question of somebody in the chamber?
Councillor Powell's got a question for you.
Yeah, carry on.
Question, but as you may know, Abergavenny was one of the first places is to have this 20 mile an hour instigated. But it's quite a busy town, and I would think that there are not many times that people could have gone much over 20 mile an hour to get to the fire station because the amount of traffic we have there. And I wonder, has it made that much difference to the Abergavenny station? Because, as I said, most of the time there's quite a lot of traffic and you wouldn't go that speed anyway. Anybody?
I'm not aware of any noticeable difference. I can, and we had similar trials in Caldicot as well, and the same goes there as well. And you're quite right. You know, none of our fighters would go 30 anyway, all the way to the station. I think if any of us drive in some of these areas, you've got to stop at junctions. You've got to start. Yeah, there's going to be people in the way. So you are correct in your observation.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for Maureen. Any other questions? No. No. Well, that's a report for information, so we aren't going to make any major decision on that. The next one is number 12, the Forward Work Programme for Finance Audit and Performance Management Committee 2023 to 2024. That's page 199. I think that's yours, Sarah. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll be covering that one for you as well.
Yeah.
So this is the forward work programme for the rest of the year. We can see that the audit of accounts report was delayed from July and deferred until the 4th of December. So we've got that coming up in our next meeting on the 4th of December. Nothing else of particular interest to raise there, Chair, just to advise members that we have got a very busy calendar for the rest of this municipal year. So I look forward to the following 2 meetings.
Well, thank you for that. Any questions anybody want to ask Sarah before we move to the last item? No, which is good. Item 13, any business the chair seems urgent? No, I've got nothing. And all I would say is thank you everybody for your input this morning, and thank you for their officers for the questions in dealing with them from members. And that's the end of the meeting. So thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Helen, as well. I should have forgot about that.
Thank you.